Hello, everyone. At the moment, it looks like we're not getting the video feeds as far as I can tell, but we do seem to be getting audio. Oh no, there we go. Everything's working fine. Right. Um, Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second talk of the Game Anglia Network Talks. We're here with Ryan Brown from Numskull, and we're going to be talking about a few things, including IP, indie journalism, and Twitter PR. So, Ryan, do you want to start us off and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Brian Brown, perhaps better known as Toad's Anime on the interwebs. I currently work as the PR manager for a video game merchandise company called Numskull. So I deal with all the press release and the influencer and press outreach and getting coverage on things, basically, and dealing with publishers and whatnot to get approval on the things we make, as well as indie developers for Numskull Games publisher, and I historically have come from a video games journalism background. So I've worked at the Mirror, BBC, Switch Player Magazine, VG 24/7, and a couple of other outlets writing about video games.
So, with Numskull, it's quite interesting that you have the licensing part of it, where you actually work to create physical merchandise of
Mm.
licensed games, and then now Numskull has recently started an actual game publishing branch, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah. Um, it's not something you see every day from a video game merchandise company. Actually, I don't think um, them going into publishing, but we already kind of had the ability to reach retail stores, so it kind of just made sense for us to step into that ourselves. A lot of the staff at Numskull, they've historically come from game, so they kind of understand how all that game retail works, and we set Numskull Games up with the original co-founder of Rising Star Games, Martin DeFries. So he has a lot of knowledge and history with setting up a video games publisher.
And how does that work? Like, what do you need to do in order to start contacting or working with an actual retail store? How does the whole physical merchandise um, business kind of work with from your experience in terms of actually contacting vendors and so on? Because like I think most of us have that one keychain that's with the Fallout guy or with the Minecraft creeper, and someone had to source that, right? Someone had to make it, and someone had to give access to that intellectual property to be able to be made.
Yeah, so of course, when we set the company, I wasn't there from the very beginning, but when Numskull was set up, the staff originally came from game, so they already had a lot of retail contacts. It was very easy for them to, at the beginning, to assure that they would have some retail presence for the merchandise they create. So that really gave them a really good footing to begin with. Of course, now it's available. Our merchandise is available worldwide. So we're in stores like GameStop in the US, EB Games in Australia, Media Market in Germany. So it's kind of everywhere. And we have a sales team that will contact new retailers and whatnot, and they're the people that make those connections to get the merchandise in an actual physical store. As for how to get it started to begin with, to get the licenses, obviously at this point we've made so much that we can kind of use that as a proof of concept to new licenses and go, we've worked with Marvel, we've worked with PlayStation, Xbox. To begin with, of course, we had to kind of prove ourselves. So the licenses we had to begin with were uh, smaller, or we had they didn't. We might have made only a few products, for example. I think we did have a play. Again, I wasn't there from the very beginning, but we had some PlayStation merchandise to begin with, but they kind of test the waters with you a bit. You don't make that many units. You don't sell to that many stores. Your license might not, your contract might not apply globally. It might just be the UK, so they can test to see what it's like and whether it sells and whether they're happy with it. And there's a long approval process, even still now, for any item. So that you have to send the concept to them for approval before you even start tooling, before you even start creating your merchandise. Uh, and then you send them, you know, 3D assets or 3D mock-ups of what you'll make. And then you go and tool it and you send them a sample and they will inevitably have changes that they'll want you to make. So you have to make those changes, send back another sample. So it's quite a long process actually in order to get something uh, from concept to a shop. Numskull specifically, we're quite well known and quite well loved among retailers because we can come up with products very quickly. Again, because we have that retail background and a strong team that have created a lot of products now, we can do things very quickly. But it's still a lengthy process. It's still a lengthy process from conception to finalization.
But and that's all like based on the fact that you do have something that looks cool, and intellectual property that you can work on. How
Yeah.
do you feel indie developers are at the moment leveraging the fact that every new game is basically a new intellectual property? Every new character that's being concepted and that's being created in 2D or 3D can become like the next very famous robot from Borderlands whose name I can't remember at the moment, or like the next creeper and so on that will eventually end up on everybody's school bags or on
Mhm.
everybody's keychains.
Sure. So, I mean, having a strong IP, having a strong brand, kind of allows you to have a merchandising opportunity in general. So that applies to indie games, applies to any kind of IP really. Um, it kind of just is about what would sell your game to begin with. If you have a product that's going to sell, then you have a brand, and so you probably have something worth merchandising. Of course, that becomes a little bit difficult in terms of actually getting it created because occasionally factories, well, most of the time factories will have a minimum order quantity. So it's a bit difficult although it does happen, but it can be difficult for indies to decide. I'm gonna lay down this money up front to a factory or to a merchandise company for a minimum order, because then it is usually on that developer to go and make sure that that stuff gets sold. Um, I think the minimum order of items can be several hundred, can be 1,000, depends what's being made really. Low risk items, you have pin badges. I think pretty much in any indie developer could quite easily go and get that done for themselves. Pin badges, stickers, uh, little items like that are very posters. Little items like that, pretty much anyone could go and source themselves, and it'd be really good. You could take them to events, give them out to people, or indeed you could sell them. It's a really good opportunity to increase your brand because, as we say, an IP is bigger than its base product. It's merchandise. It's events. It's culture and everything surrounding it. Um, so yeah, any indie developer or any developer can really go and get those basic products done on their own. Obviously, if you want to go into more complicated things like figurines, um, or stuff that we've done like incense burner, clothes, unless you're just getting something pretty through Redbubble, which you could do. Um, when you get to that kind of thing, it is a little bit more complicated, and that's when a merchandising partner might be a little bit more advisable.
You mentioned events, so how would that go? Sorry, you said not only keychains or pins, but also events. So what did you have in mind for that? I'll reload my screen at the moment because I understand that you're hearing me really weird.
Yeah, um, yeah. So for events, in that case, I mean, if you're an indie developer, for example, taking your game to an event like EGX, like Rezzed, um, and having pin badges there, either to give away, um, have as a competition. So you could use that as an engagement piece. So a pin badge, sticker, etc. You could have, if you beat this high score, and or tweet our game with this hashtag, then you'll get a pin badge, then you'll get a sticker. So you can use it as a form of engagement as well as just a general brand increase. Um, or indeed, what a lot of people don't even think about, but something that we do at Numskull is we team up with local venues. So there is the loading bars, for example, the loading arcade themed video game bars. Now I set up press events at those at their bars to show off our merchandise to press, and God bless them. They don't charge for that. They just want you to pay for the drinks. Um, so it'd be very feasible for an indie developer to set up their own event, really, and to go out and contact people and invite other developers and members of press, indie press and whatnot, invite them to come and try the game, and just have some pin badges and order in some food for them or something. It's not really something I've seen an indie developer do. If I were myself, if I were doing PR for an indie game, I would probably do that. Um, but yeah, there are definitely some opportunities with events and branding and a mix of the two.
That's cool. Give me 1 sec so that I refresh this, and
Yeah,
we'll
no
be
worries.
right back online.
Yeah,
We are back online now. Right, let's so we talked a bit about IP and the fact that you can actually set up press events in order to promote your game and your merchandise. But what about social media? So, looking at Twitter accounts, because that's where most of the UK games industry seems to be.
yeah.
You have about 20,000 followers. The Numskull account has about 45,000. How did you get there from zero in both cases?
Sure. So it's all about engagement, really. And so for Numskull, it's two different because one's a personal account, one's a business account. So I have to treat them both very differently. So on mine, um, I make sure that I get in with my peers. I follow the appropriate people that I want to be seeing what I post, both on my account and the business account. I suppose that's the case. We follow the appropriate people that we want to see our posts, and we do. Well, on my personal account, I post a lot of video game news because obviously that's what people follow me for. So I gain engagement through that. I make sure I interact with everyone. What's probably more comparable for indie developers and other people is how I run the business account, so the Numskull account. So again, it's all about engagement. So it's about engagement pieces. We don't always tweet about our products 100% of the time because people will get bored of it. So I'd say it's about 50-50. So we tweet about our product 50% of the time, 50% the other time is about engagement. For indie devs specifically, something I notice is a lot of them, understandably so, uh, don't really know how to do PR. And what they tend to do is their PR is getting other developers interested in their game. And that's kind of the end of it. So it can occasionally be the case that an indie dev's entire marketing and PR is just about getting other developers interested in their game. And of course, their audience isn't other developers, their audience is other players. Obviously, that's not a bad move because everyone will share each other's games and whatnot. But it's about getting people outside of that remit, outside of the games development remit, interested in your game. So you need to be doing general engagement posts, not just about your game, but just relatable gaming topics. You need to be kind of really diving into all of those communities, um, replying to virtually everyone. It's Twitter; it's an open forum, so it don't need to even be people that you necessarily know. It can just be a relevant topic that you see people tweeting about. If you have TweetDeck, you can have a column open for specific search terms. So let's say you're making a video game about a cat in space. Let's say you have a TweetDeck search column up about space or about cats or cats in space, and then you can kind of go reply to the relevant people, and not necessarily just spamming your game, but just engaging with them in a very natural, organic way, because they may end up following you back. In many cases, they will, and then they'll engage with the stuff that you are posting organically. What I will also say about running a social account is, generally speaking, an organic post is always going to perform better than a retweet or a share. So the people that follow you because they are definitely interested in what you have to say. Whereas if someone is following someone else, the only assurance is that they're interested in what that person wants to say. So if something you are saying has been retweeted onto their page, that's great. But you want to care more about what people are engaging with on your own page as well. So it's a delicate balance. It's definitely difficult to grow if you're literally starting from fresh. It's definitely difficult to start again. What I would say is if you're an indie developer and you already have some people following you, if you're considering starting up a new Twitter account for a specific game, I would really not recommend that. That's only something that big publishers can get away with, and even then, a lot of their promotion is simply through their main account. If you look at Bethesda, for example, most of their promotion of Doom and Skyrim and all that stuff is through the Bethesda accounts, not just the game specific accounts. And you may not have that brand engagement yet. So if you already have your own account, you'll kind of want to focus on doing all of your social outreach just through that. I wouldn't go and make a specific account for a specific game.
So that's really interesting because we recently just passed the 1,000 follower mark with the Game Anglia account, and which our current account manager Steve was really happy about. And we did a giveaway, and I think we got more engagement on that giveaway than we did on most of our posts for the past year or so. Um, so when you say you need to create engagement, on one hand, you need to actually go out and be more than just a mouthpiece and actually start having your own personality and reply, and at the same time create the type of content that your players would want to see, not just other game developers, right?
Hmm.
So what about you, following or using popular hashtags or popular tools in order to figure out what's happening in the media?
Sure. So one thing that I've been using myself at Numskull recently is I've found that the power of the hashtag um, has lessened somewhat because Twitter search results now, whether you're using the hashtag or not, when searching a term, it will kind of come up. Um, so if it's something specific, let's use the cat in space thing again. If it's something specific, let's say your game name is called Adventure Cat in Space. If you're using hashtag Adventure Cat in Space, it kind of doesn't really, or it doesn't really do much different than just saying Adventure Cat in Space. The only reason I would use a hashtag is if it's a call to action. So it's something you want people to use in order to engage about a specific topic. So for example, you're doing a giveaway, and then you want people to use that hashtag Adventure Cat in Space. Use the tweet Adventure Cat in Space, and one random person will win a code for the game or whatever. Something like that. Fine. Um, but generally, you don't need to focus too much specifically on a hashtag. The power of it just isn't what it used to be. Uh, it only works as a call to action, really.
So you mentioned TweetDeck. Are there any other tools that you use day to day?
Yeah, so a lot of people will use Hootsuite, which kind of, or other programs like that, which will kind of incorporate all of your social channels into one. I'm kind of just using TweetDeck and individual products for other social channels just because I've used a TweetDeck. And with TweetDeck, you can set up lots of different columns. I find that really useful. Um, if you are specifically caring about Twitter engagement, if that's something you're specifically aiming for, I'd say that's a really good tool to use. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, any other tools you would really need to use specifically for just for Twitter. Everything you need is kind of there, and you can add in your different accounts if you do have different accounts. As I say, you can add in search columns. Um, yeah. TweetDeck. If Twitter promotion is what you're after, then TweetDeck is kind of the only tool you'll need, other than of course actually getting engagement for yourself.
And what about having multiple social media channels for your game or for your company, or for your company and your game at the same time, as you mentioned earlier?
Mm,
Because it seems like at the moment, you need to be visible on Twitter to find other game developers and press. You
yeah.
need to be visible on Facebook in order to find some of your player base. You need to be visible on Instagram to find some other part of your player base. It would be
Mm,
great if you also had like a YouTube channel where you post Let's Plays. You should also have like a Tumblr account or a Snapchat account, because that's where some other part of your player base is. And of course, you need to have like a website where you have a devlog
mm,
that you write in. So a lot of the times, it feels like having all of those different channels can be quite confusing.
yeah.
What have you found actually works differently?
Sure. So definitely, PR is a job. It's unfortunate, but it is. It gets to a point where I'm sure indie developers maybe don't account for it and leave it to the last minute, or don't realize quite how much work it is. It's a full time job basically. Um, and sometimes that will require a developer working almost as long as they have making the game, promoting the game. I would say that in terms of social media channels, platforms specifically, Twitter is the most powerful one for games out of Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Definitely wouldn't hurt to have a Facebook and Instagram as well. Um, but Twitter is definitely the most powerful one. It just seems to be where the gaming community lies of those three platforms. Of course, you want to be noticed on things like Reddit as well, on YouTube. Um, I don't know necessarily that unless you are really pushing out a lot of content. I don't know that having your own YouTube channel and maintaining that is worthwhile. If it's literally just that you have a trailer, um, you're probably doing just as well just tweeting it. Just tweeting the raw video file or posting it on your other channels. If you're very time poor, you don't want to have uh, channels you have to run that necessarily. If you have someone that can do it full time, then great. You may as well run a YouTube channel and maintain it. Um, other than that, the promotion it's not going to do it for itself. It's not going to work on its own. You will need to put some work into it. You will need to outreach for yourself. And usually that means giving out codes if it's a game that's coming out imminently to relevant influencers and press. Uh, you know, and there are specific outlets that will cover specifically indie games. There are ways you can kind of word your game in order to get more mainstream press involved, and it's very difficult to get that mainstream press, but it's worth trying anyway because some of them might pick it up. Even when I worked at the Mirror, um, that's as mainstream as a website can possibly be. It hasn't got a gaming audience, but several times I would have covered indie games just because I thought it was a quirky enough sell that it was interesting for people that people would click on it basically. And that's what you want to keep in mind is at the end of the day, you do want to appeal to a journalist, influencers, audiences, personal interest. But if they're going to cover your game, you want you want to give them almost that selling point that they can tell other people about. Um, so you don't want to lie about what your game is, but you do need to find a way to word it to get coverage.
No, that's fair enough. Like, I went to a really good talk a while ago, done by one of the games industry that biz journalists, and the talk was literally, "Hey, here's 30 minutes on how you should write an email if you want me to actually read it and reply."
Yeah,
And there's a really good GDC Vault talk, which I think is free at the moment, um, by two guys. One of them's from South Africa and the other one's from the Netherlands, about how to write emails for journalists or for like really busy people, like intended for really busy people. And I think
yes, yeah,
there's some really good resources out there for that. But
definitely.
most of the people who are following us are usually indie game developers who would be looking to develop their own brand, to develop their own Twitter accounts, for example, or their social media, whatever that might be. And I know personally, like I really liked your advice about, hey, reply, engage yourself, and then other
Definitely.
people will follow you, because I know that's what I do when people comment on my tweets. I'm like, oh my God, you noticed me. Here, I'll have a look on your profile, and I think if I think you're interesting, then I'll follow you back. So, oh, when did you get like how long have you been on Twitter, and kind of like how have you seen your social media growth between your different careers?
Sure. So I've personally, with my personal account, I've been on Twitter for about 7 years, I think. And then I've run store accounts for retail. I've run, or at least had some level of control over some of the Mirror Twitter accounts, and obviously now run the Numskull account. I've run the Sega Shop Europe store account, and a retail chain called Geeks over on their account. So I've run a lot of different accounts, and the growth has been different between them all. What I will say is something I've found for all of those, for brands especially, if you're looking to build a brand, is you will really feel like you want to say we. You want to say we instead of I. Don't. If you are a single developer or a sole developer, that personal touch really helps. Say I. Say I think this or I think this, and you can speak even if it is a brand account or you're speaking as a game or or as a studio, just speak like a person. Just don't want to sound too corporate because people don't like that, and that applies to even a big company like Numskull. When I'm replying to people, I don't say hi. Yeah, we're working on that. I speak in first person. I speak as an I. It's such a weird little thing, but it really helps. And you want to reply to pretty much everyone, because you'll end up having certain people that will reply a lot, and they'll feel like they know you. They feel like they're your friend, and sometimes they are. Um, but you want them to certainly feel like that. You want them to certainly feel almost a loyalty towards what you're making, and replying to them will definitely help do that. Um, and another thing I would say is don't focus too much on um, being a one man studio or one woman studio or a small team. It's not something that gamers particularly grab on too much anymore, and it certainly isn't something that press grab on too that much anymore. And I still see it in press releases and Twitter bios and social posts. Is hi, we're just a small team, and it doesn't really work anymore. Because there's been a lot of them. There's been a lot of those that have found success, and it's not really a pull anymore. So it's on one end, I'm saying speak in first person, speak on a more personal touch. On the other end, I'm saying don't rely on getting coverage just because you're one person or a small team.
And you did quite a bit of your career as a journalist for
Mm.
various outlets, as well as a collaborator with certain outlets.
Mm.
Tell us more about that part of your career. How did you start? How did you get started? What was your peak?
Sure. I actually started working at retail in a game store. And while I was working there, I started up my own video game blog, as I'm sure lots of other people have. It was called Coin Arcade. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was called Coin Arcade, and it ended up doing okay because I was trying to feed into SEO, not in a spammy way or clickbaity way, but I was feeding into SEO trends. So I was keeping up on what works SEO wise. I was making sure that my articles were very SEO friendly. Um, which is important no matter what, whether you're making a game or writing. Uh, that is always important. SEO is always important. So it ended up performing okay. It ended up performing all right. It wasn't something I was doing for work, but it ended up doing okay. And I ran the Twitter account for my local game store. So those two things combined just in a really nice way for the Mirror. Um, Ended up getting friendly with someone that worked at the Mirror on Twitter. Every job I've ever had, by the way, has been through Twitter. So Twitter is very important. Ended up getting friendly with someone on Twitter. Got a job interview originally to be on the community team at the Mirror, but with the idea that they knew they were interested in doing games coverage. So obviously got the job and slowly moved over towards doing a bit of games coverage there. And that obviously opened the door for me to be able to do freelance work at VG247 and other magazines and outlets, and be on call for BBC. Um, so yeah, very much. I won't pretend it wasn't a little bit of luck. It certainly was a lot of luck. But having that little blog, and working out her SEO worked. Really put me in a good place.
And what would you say was your biggest achievement as an indie journalist?
Oh my goodness, my biggest achievement as an indie journalist. To be honest, just being able to go to events. I see a lot of journalists complain when they have to go to events, and I don't get it. I love it. I don't know why you would complain about that. They're like, oh no, I have to go to E3. Oh, I have to fly over to LA and go to E3. I'm like, oh, it's tiring, but it's an amazing experience, for sure. Mine probably was going to America to cover Kingdom Hearts 3. That was amazing. I grew up with Kingdom Hearts, so it was absolutely incredible for me to be able to go in and cover that. Um, and on a much more personal level, being able to give the limelight to a lot of small games at the Mirror. I had a lot of, I was kind of free to do what I wanted at the Mirror, really, in terms of coverage. And I kind of made it my mission that I was going to get coverage for a lot of indie games while I was there. Um, and the honest truth is it doesn't get as many clicks. It just doesn't. Um, but I was very determined to get a lot of limelight on indie games. So I would go to things like Sweden Gamescom, which is only a small little event in Sweden with a lot of indie games, and I'd cover that in the mirror, and I'd cover in depth all the games there. There were some certain games because every day or at least every couple of days I'll look through all of the newest releases on itch.io and I'll download all the games that I think look really good. And occasionally I will look at those and be like, do you know what? I think I can find a way to word this to put it on the mirror. So I would, and even occasionally got them in print, got them in the games column in the print newspaper, which was really awesome. So yeah, getting the limelight on a lot of games that otherwise would not have got mainstream press. Definitely one of my personal top achievements, I think.
That's really cool. I mean, being able to go to events is definitely tiring and definitely cool. And especially since we're in the UK, there's a lot of smaller events that you can go
Mm,
to, both in the UK and internationally, where where you basically just need to pay for your airfare and like a cheap Airbnb or something like that if you want
yeah.
to go. What type of advice would you have for people who want to go into indie journalism in terms of like the skills that you need, what your like do's and don'ts, especially because we have quite a few people who are either recent graduates or at the moment like in college, so they're still debating what career path to take, and journalism is just as valid as being like a full-time developer, right?
Hmm. Absolutely. So the one thing I always say is I won't pretend that it's not difficult. There's a lot of people that want to be video game journalists, and obviously only a limited space for that. But there are two avenues that a lot of people don't often think about, which are really good avenues to get into them. Um, so there are a lot of indie magazines recently. It's a very recent trend that I've noticed that indie magazines, like Switch Player magazine, for example, um, that are constantly looking for writers. And unlike a lot of bigger outlets, they don't necessarily care too much about experience. They just care that you have something interesting to say, that you are able to cover games, and that you can write well. And that's all you need really. And then obviously having that experience can then be used to apply to other outlets. And I've seen people do that. Um, Pretty much every journalist has kind of started off at a smaller outlet. Um, so that definitely works. Another thing I've seen, which I've personally done myself, is contact local newspapers. They don't have games writers, but notice that games are a big industry, and occasionally I've just randomly contacted a local newspaper and gone, "Hi, I don't know if you've heard about this in video games. Don't know if it might be interesting. I'd be happy to write about it for you." And they'll be like, "Oh, sure," you know. And you'll occasionally be able to write for local newspapers just because it's not something they have writers for. So those kind of avenues are really good avenues to start down. Um, you can't expect to immediately go and work for IGN or Kotaku. Obviously, it's not going. That won't happen. Um, but writing for those small outlets will really help give you the experience. Or even if you can't manage to get into one of those, start up your own blog. Um, on the PR end, a lot of the samples I give to people are small outlets, and like startup journalists and stuff. Um, a lot of companies want to work with those outlets still because they have their own little audience and their own special audience of people that might not necessarily read a lot of the bigger places. So start up your own blog. That doesn't cost anything. You can start up a WordPress blog. Um, much like I did, just make sure that you understand how your articles will look on Google and stuff like that. You can really, without getting clickbait, because no one wants to get clickbait, but you can really start to, if you just look at the articles on Google, let's say Kingdom Hearts, for example, Google Kingdom Hearts, see which articles come up and see why those headlines are being listed. And you can kind of get a feel for the kind of headlines that work. You can kind of get a feel for the kind of body of text that works. Um, SEO wise, for example, having a lot of links that go to other sources. SEO actually quite likes that. Google quite likes it when you do that because I think that you're helping your reader. Um, SEO algorithms are very complicated, so it would take a long time to explain how they work entirely. But you can learn bits and bobs, and just have your own personal blog, and that will definitely help you with experience. Um, and pitch, please pitch. A lot of outlets are looking for pitchers as opposed to full-time writers. They're looking for freelance writers. If you have an interesting story, it doesn't really matter who you are or your experience. Um, an outlet will take it. Um, Places like VG247, places like Wireframe Magazine, pretty much every outlet you can think of is always looking for pictures. So if you have an interesting story, or even if you don't think you have an interesting story, if you've worked in games, if you've been in gaming communities, there are stories there. You just have to try and find an angle to make it interesting. Um, I think pretty much anyone, I think pretty much any gamer has an interesting story to tell. It's just about the way it's told. Um, so yeah, there are definitely avenues to go into indie journalism for sure.
So let's first having a look at the comments. Andrew is telling me that the Borderlands robot's called Crabtrap, which he's totally right. Let's take some questions from the people who are watching this live from the Game Anglia network. And while we're waiting for the questions, which can be about anything in terms of like Numskull, in terms of running your own Twitter account, in terms of being an indie games journalist, why don't you tell me a bit about like the events that you're looking forward to till the rest of the year then?
Oh, the events I'm looking forward to. So the main one I'm looking forward to is Gamescom. It's a little bit strange having come from a journalist background and now working in PR full time, because I still do freelance journalism, but I'm a full time PR manager. So now I'm going to places like Gamescom, and I'm not there doing journalism. I'm doing PR work. So I'll be at Gamescom this year at the Numskull booth, and I'll be having meetings with press. Usually I'm on the other side, so it's very strange. But I'll be having meetings with press to show them our merchandise and the games that we're working on and stuff. I'm super looking forward to that. Honestly, it's great to not be in the office. It's great to be able to actually talk to people about the stuff we're doing. And it's just a really fun time. I love Gamescom. I've been there a couple of times, usually as press, but once before as PR, and it is fantastic. It's just really good fun. Um, we've got I'm setting up my own press event soon, and I'm doing in a loading bar in August. Really looking forward to that. That's one I'm running. Of course, I'm not quite as relaxed as I am about Gamescom because I have to actually run it. But yeah, lots of really good things to look forward to. Um, yeah, lots of events to look forward to.
What's your own event going to be about then?
Oh, so my own event will be at a loading bar in August. And that's primarily to show off our quarter arcade cabinets. So we make quarter scale collectible arcade machines. And we're releasing Gallagher in September. So it's mostly to show that off to some retro YouTubers and some press, like Stuff Magazine is going to be there, and Jason Bradbury from the Gadget Show. So a couple of press people are going to come to have a look at it. But we'll also have some unannounced stuff that I can unveil for the first time that we'll be announcing publicly a couple of days afterwards. So yeah, yeah, and some games. We'll bring some of our Numskull Games stuff there as well, which will be interesting because Numskull Games is a fairly recent venture for us. So I've not had to show anyone that kind of stuff in public yet. So it'll be really interesting to see what people's reactions are to the Numskull Games stuff.
Okay, well, that's really cool. I don't see any questions coming through at the moment. So, where can people find you if they have any other questions outside of this then?
Sure. You can find me mostly on Twitter at Toads Anime. That's where you'll see me lingering most of the day. If you have any questions at all, my DMs are open. They've always been open and always will be open. So feel free to DM me or just mention me or whatever. And of course, if you have any Numskull specific questions, you can totally still fire them there, or you can ask me at Numskull Designs because I run that account as well. But yeah, always happy to answer questions and help peeps. If you have any
Ah,
questions about indie PR or Twitter or anything like that.
cool. We actually have a question that's come through.
Cool.
How do you put together a pitch? Is it just an elevator type pitch, or do you give a sample? Just guessing you can't show the entire text of your already written story in case they nab it.
Um, yeah, so I have actually done that latter bit before, where I've literally given them the entire story because I was like, it's really difficult to sell this. I'll just send it over to them. If it's a respected outlet, they're probably not going to nab it, but it's not. You shouldn't have to write an entire article before you pitch it. Um, you do want to kind of give a draft of it almost in your pitch. So you want to make the person you're pitching to understand why someone would click on it. So even giving them a rough headline idea might be a good idea. Rough headline idea. As I said earlier about SEO, you want to kind of pick up on trends as to what would be clicked on. You don't need to make it clickbait, but you need to make it something that people would click on. What's the most recent pitch I did? I did a pitch about a story. Um, there was a limited run game called Poop Slinger or Poop Launcher, um, and it was by a new company that had sprung up. They sold this PS4 game, a physical PS4 game called Poop Slinger, and sold like a couple of hundred copies, and then just disappeared off the face of the earth, and so they went bust. And it was really weird. And so I kind of investigated that, and you want to almost do some of the work beforehand, and just in your mind, you don't want to waste too much time, but you do want to think that someone will take it because you do want to do some legwork before you pitch. So before I pitched that to anyone, I'd already contacted the developer to get a comment from them. I'd already contacted some of the other limited run publishers just to see if it was a prank and if they were running it, because that's what a lot of people were saying. I contacted some people that had ordered the game. So I'd done a lot of that legwork already. Because if you're going to pitch that to an outlet, to tell them I've already done the work, it's I can write it, like it's ready to go, and I've done work that you can't do. Um, you want to have either a story that you are personally involved in, or that you personally have spoken to people about, because it really needs to be something that they can't just quickly go and write themselves. You can't, for example, go, oh, I've got a pitch. Call of Duty is coming out and they've just announced it. Like, you can't pitch just a basic news article because they can go write it. So something like that, and there are lots of weird and interesting stories like that around that you can pitch. And as I say, just do a little bit of the legwork first to speak to that person. And you can mention that in your pitch, that you have official comments from those people and you've spoken with them intensively and blah blah blah. Um, yeah, you just want to make your pitch sound interesting to a reader, even though you're speaking to a journalist or an editor. You want to make your pitch sound interesting to a reader. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I hope so too. And while we're waiting to see if there's any other question or like a comment on this, what's the article that you've done the most research on?
That was one of them. Um, Even though it was something very silly, that poop slinger thing was certainly one of them. What's the article I've done most research on? Loot boxes. Whenever I cover stuff on loot boxes, I have to do a lot of research for that, because especially if it's something you're being critical in, if it's an article where you're being critical about a specific publisher or a specific game mechanic or anything really, people will pick up on any errors very very quickly, or any inconsistencies. So you need to know your stuff. Um, so I had to do a lot of research whenever I cover anything to do with loot boxes. Uh, I don't I don't usually expect to be sitting and reading documents about international law, but hey, sometimes you need to. So yeah, research for things can put you in really weird places. Um, but actually, in terms of having to outreach the most amount number of people for a piece, it really was that poop slinger thing, because I had to contact about 10 different people because it was such a strange story. Um, yeah, yeah, you definitely need to do a bit of research at least before you pitch.
No, definitely. I mean, it's the same with games, right? Research your
Yeah,
target audience, research the other games that are out there to see if
yeah,
anybody's done anything exactly the same or if there's
yes,
any
yeah. If
good
the article
ideas out
already
there.
exists, it's not going to be taken. So
Yeah. Okay. No other questions so far, so I think that's about it.
cool.
Thank you so much for chatting with us, Ryan. I hope that you enjoyed it,
Yeah,
and we'll have this video made available in about a week's time. And if you want to retweet that, would highly appreciate it.
definitely,
And
of
in
course.
terms of the next Game Anglia Network talk, we're gonna meet in 2 weeks, and we're gonna have a chat with Adrian Simple from the Gaming Observer, which is the number one most downloaded Alexa news skill at the moment. So we'll talk about that and about voice devices and voice skills. Okay, thank you everyone, and have a good night.